In this lesson, we'll cover work sharing ownership. Now, work sharing ownership has to do with work sets. Basically, if you take ownership of that work set, you are the only one that can actually modify anything with that work set. You sort of lock it. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, an example would be if you're under design review for those elements. You could take ownership of that work set, therefore locking anyone else from actually modifying anything to that work set. So how do we take ownership? Well, first, let's open up our user file. To do that, let's go to the Open menu and then browse to where you stored the files for this lesson. The C drive, Learning Revit Structure 2015, Chapter 16. And then the user file for this lesson is going to be the central file 1601 underscore username. Now, feel free to use the file you created from the last lesson if you have it. Let's choose the central file 1601 username. This is the user's file that synchronizes to the central file. Now, the first thing you would do whenever working upon an element within Revit is to change the work set to whatever you're working upon, and then continue on to add things and change things. Remember, too, to save periodically as you design within Revit. Now, to take ownership of a work set, let's go to the Collaborate tab on the ribbon. All the way on the left, click Work Sets. Now, let's say we wanted to lock or take ownership of the columns work set. To do that, click No to the right of columns and then select Yes. You can see your name now appears as the owner, meaning you are the only one that can actually modify anything with this work set. Other users can see elements of the work set, but they can't do any modifying. Again, a good reason to do this is when you're under design review for those elements. So now just click OK. Now, if you click the work sets drop down, you can actually see columns does not say not editable, meaning it's editable or it's locked by you. Now, at this point, you would continue on to design, do whatever you want, and then when you're done, you need to synchronize. So to synchronize, I would choose Synchronize with Central. And if you do sync now, it just syncs your changes up to the central file and pulls down any new changes. If you choose Synchronize and Modify Settings, here you can see where the central file is located, and you can also relinquish any control to work sets that you have taken. For example, the columns work set. If I check mark the user created work sets, I will relinquish control of it when I synchronize. Now, maybe I want to do that because maybe the design review is done. And I could place in comments too. So I could say if I did any work on the columns, maybe the columns are modified. And then to sync, all I have to do is hit OK. Now, one last note, the checkbox in the lower left is basically going to save the file before you synchronize. So when you click OK, Revit automatically saves the file, now synchronizes, and lastly, it relinquishes the control of the columns work set. To see that, go to Work Sets. And I can see Editable is marked as No for all of these because I relinquished control because of the setting when I did synchronize. Click OK. So as a review, in this lesson, we talked about work sharing ownership. We discussed that ownership is dealing with work sets. And you would take ownership of a work set to lock everyone else from modifying it. For example, if that work set element was under review or a design review, I could lock it or take ownership. It's marked as editable, so no one else can modify it but me. But in essence, I'm just locking it or freezing it for a design review. To do this, you would go to the Collaborate tab and click Work Sets. Change No to Yes for that work set in particular and click OK. You now have ownership of it and then synchronize changes up to the actual central file. If you do a modified sync, you can actually relinquish control of the work set by checking the checkbox.